Sure enough, it's been a wonderful presentation and learning about the experiences and what the game will be providing. Obviously, we're operating under dealing with rational actors, but sometimes policymakers may choose to act irrationally. So we can provide the best analysis, the best feedbacks. So perhaps is there going to be like some kind of an add-on in how you have to deal with such uncertainties, in the sense that you could provide the best of advice on risk, on threats, and also on climate change. But somewhere down the line, people are not going to make the rational decisions and choices, and especially in leadership roles due to several interests and so forth. Obviously, we can't find the answer right away. But what is your sense? Thank you.
Yes, of course. We've been used to using predictive models, right? Probabilities. Basically, that's the most acceptable way if you would like to convince a decision maker, to invest on something. And we use probabilities to perhaps make sense of the improbable things. Even in foresight, right? We're quite conservative in the way we do scenarios because we don't want to be like some sort of labeled as crazy or ridiculous or something like that, because no one invests on emergence. Perhaps I might be wrong to say that no one actually invests on ridiculous things. I might probably wrong, but then in the public sector, it's another thing, right? So there might be a few. Of course, in the corporate, we've seen a lot of investments in this area, especially in innovation, right? Even in innovation, they're pretty quite conservative as well. But then, of course, the conversation that we've been having around these topics of emergence and ridiculousness or outliers is not really there yet as far as the public sector is concerned. One particular case is the pandemic, right? So I was working in a company, one of the biggest information technology company in the world in 2015. And we've been doing pandemic scenarios back then. That was in 2015 for different sites involving like around 70,000 employees and 500,000 employees around the world. If a pandemic occurs, let's just say, for example, in the Philippines, what would the implication be to our business processes and our operations, from strategy, consulting to business processes and data? Because pandemic hits us, humans, right? It's not really the processes. We proposed in a global pandemic, right? But then the CEOs, the decision makers, were pretty quite conservative in the sense that the cost this scenarios would entail, as far as its impact to operations is concerned. Sherman, we cannot do a global pandemic scenario because that would cost us like around millions of dollars if we're going to test this in a day. Make it local, not global. So that's what we did. Local pandemic. So we did the local pandemic disruption scenario just between and among the sites that will be impacted by the pandemic. That's it. You just transfer your business processes and your functions to another country like India, for example, or Europe or the US, right? And that's what we did. And then we keep on pushing this for the next 3 years. And they always worry about the actual cost that these types of scenarios would entail as far as the implications to the existing operation on a day-to-day basis. And then the pandemic occurred, right? So the global standard of crisis management for 21 days, the real situation was really ridiculous. It took us 2 years. It wasn't 21 days. So the standard was probabilities, the average, something that's acceptable. But then, after 21 days, the pandemic went beyond 21 days and you don't have policies about it. Decision makers get to decide on things that doesn't have a playbook, and created a lot of anxieties for them because you're talking about millions and dollars of costs and cancellation of contracts that they started to begin to say, we've heard this many, many times during the pandemic, that we don't have a playbook for it, right? So it's ridiculous. And not only that, right? And if you try to think of it, us, including futurists, need to build that capacity and capability to think in terms of emergence, right? To think beyond complex system, even because there is a close correlation between randomness and chaos. There is a close similarity between randomness and chaotic systems. In fact, if you try to do a research on it, they are basically similar, fundamentally similar, chaos and randomness. In the real world, right? We know this, common sense. In the real world, there are a lot of randomness on a daily basis happening, even in our personal lives, right? But then the question is how do we get better at integrating and incorporating randomness in the way we do foresight? That's my current question. And I'm just developing a game to make a provocation and facilitate the conversation and how to figure out ways by which we get better at randomness. So that's one.
Thank you very much. And I guess crisis management, as it evolves into resiliency and anti-fragility, there will be both more funds and more support, I guess, in the long run. So thank you very much for your work. And thank you for the
yeah.